I was born with a curiosity to explore the realms of darkness, to seek out the elusive shadows and question their existence, their never-ending convolution with the light. All things were born from this darkness. Question everything. Find your own truth, engage all mysteries, open your mind, and join me on my journey through the darkness. The Ghost Lights of Silver Cliff Cemetery, Silver Cliff, Colorado. Nestled beneath the majestic Sangre de Cristo Mountains lies the Silver Cliff Cemetery. The cemetery was established in 1878 as a final resting place for those whom died during the population increase of Colorado's silver mining rush. Although Silver Creek was once the third most populated city in Colorado, the fall of the mining industries due to unreliable management of the mines caused the population to drastically decline. Today, only 667 residents remain. The legends of the Ghost Lights of Silver Cliff Cemetery began in 1882 when three men stumbled upon the cemetery on a moonless night. There, amongst the rustic headstones, they saw bluish orbs of dancing light. The three men watched in disbelief, later telling tales of the illuminating manifestations. In 1885, tragedy befell 10 miners whom tragically died during the explosion of the Bull Domingo mine. The shaft house, along with some machinery, erupted in a fiery blaze, entombing the miners within. They were laid to rest at the Silver Cliff Cemetery. Witnesses would again see the glowing orbs in the 1890s, when two miners from the nearby town of Rosita happened to cross the cemetery. They were blindly making their way to the local watering hole in Silver Cliff during a torrential downpour when they saw the lights weaving in and out of the gravestones. Both men entered the bar in astonishment, excitedly recalling the luminous phenomenon they had witnessed. Many believe the two men were heavily intoxicated, but decided to investigate because of the ardent way in which they talked about what they had seen. Upon arriving at the cemetery, many of the bar patrons looked in disbelief at the enigmatic orbs dancing about the tombstones. Many believe the lights were the manifestations of the miners that lost their lives during the Bull Domingo mine explosion. Silver Cliff Cemetery gained national notoriety in 1969 when National Geographic published an article about the now infamous ghost lights. The publication stated, quote, "Dim, round spots of blue-white light glowed ethereally among the graves. For 15 minutes we walked about the place, pursuing one will-o'-the-wisp, then another. I aimed my flashlight at one eerie glow and switched it on. It revealed only a tombstone. No doubt, someone someday will prove there's nothing at all supernatural in the luminous manifestations of Silver Cliff Cemetery, and I will feel a tinge of disappointment." Unquote. 52 years later, the ghost lights of Silver Cliff Cemetery remain a mystery. The Haunting of Black Forest, Colorado Springs, Colorado. Deep in the isolated woods of the Black Forest lies a portal to another realm and one of the most haunted homes in the United States. Settled below the majestic backdrop of the Rocky Mountains, the Black Forest became home to the Lee family in 1991. Stephen Lee, his wife Elizabeth, and their two sons first witnessed the paranormal activity shortly after the house was purchased. Elizabeth recalls coming home one day and seeing a flurry of explosive colors flashing throughout the house. She compared it to fireworks during the 4th of July. Heavy footsteps could be heard running across one side of the roof to the other, and sounds of rattling chains often awoke the Lees from their sleep. It wasn't long before strange activity occurred every day. One terrifying night, the Lees awoke to the sounds of an orchestra playing. They investigated the home but never found a cause for the noise. The boys began seeing shadows and strange lights. On multiple occasions, electronics and appliances would turn off and on by themselves. Steve and Lee didn't believe that their home was haunted, instead drumming up the strange activity to be a sick prank. He believed the government was somehow trying to scare his family away from the property. The Lees hired a private investigator, but found no conclusive evidence of what was causing the bizarre phenomenon. Soon after, the family was afflicted by a strange chemical odor that burned their eyes and throats, but never located the source. Stephen Lee decided to take matters into his own hands. He invested thousands into state-of-the-art surveillance gear and motion detectors. For 4 years, the Lees captured multiple unexplainable evidence. The motion detectors would alert that something had triggered the device when nothing was there. In 1993, the El Paso County Sheriff's Department opened an investigation into the Lee family home. There had been a total of 63 unexplained break-ins, and were followed up with investigations that remained inconclusive or unsolved. The security cameras continued to catch phantom faces, streaks of light, and shadow figures. The Lees had invested everything they owned into the investigations and surveillance, and still had nothing to show for it. Desperate, the Lees contacted the television show Sightings in 1995. The producer of Sightings saw a few photographs from the Lee surveillance footage and decided to act right away. They brought in renowned sidekick Peter James and Echo Bodine to assist the family. Both sidekicks picked up on a monumental amount of activity and told the Lees that their home was a portal to the other side. Echo Bodine felt as if she was being held by a dark force, as one of the crew from Sightings felt as if something was attacking her. Frantic and screaming, she was escorted away from the home. Peter James felt the presence of something trying to get the attention of the Lee family. He said it was in connection with a pharmaceutical company and a man named Howard who was believed to have died of an overdose, but had actually been murdered. Stephen Lee was in shock. There was no way that Peter James could have known that. Howard was a longtime friend of the family. Howard lost his son, Howard Jr., in the 60s of an apparent overdose. Howard Jr. had received the drugs from his friend that worked in pharmaceuticals. Over the years, the activity increased. The Lees have caught doors opening and closing by themselves, the television turning off and on, disembodied voices, alarms that trigger for no apparent reason, the dark shadow of what looks like a flying dog, along with many other shadowy figures, the apparitions of an old woman, a small child, and a large man dressed in 1800s attire, and hundreds of photographs of faces in the mirrors. The Lees still live in the same home to this day and have amassed a library of paranormal evidence. The Grave of the Vampyre, Lafayette, Colorado. East of the Rocky Mountains, you will find the modest town of Lafayette, Colorado. Lafayette was founded in 1888 during the rise of the coal mining industry. It was during this time that immigrants came to America in the pursuit of a better life. One of these immigrants was a man from Transylvania known as Fodor Glava. Glava was said to be an unnaturally tall and thin man with a pale complexion and unusually long fingernails. He worked the mines in Lafayette and often kept to himself. Glava's wife stayed abroad, and he one day hoped to bring her to Colorado after he gained enough finances to support her journey. However, Glava would never see his wife again. On the 4th day of December 1918, Glava succumbed to the Spanish flu. He collapsed outside the mine and was buried in a pauper's grave in the Lafayette Municipal Cemetery. He was 43 years old. Although deceased, Fodor Glava's legend was just beginning. Even in life, Glava was seen as an outsider, different from most of the residents. His quiet demeanor and the fact that he was Transylvanian made people uneasy. Shortly after his death, a small tree began to grow out of his resting place. The tree was growing where his heart should be. Residents began seeing a tall white apparition roaming the cemetery after sunset. Legend states that the tree growing from the grave is from the stake that was impaled in Glava's heart after his death. Soon after the tree began growing, the grave became enveloped in red, thorny roses. Some believe the rose vines are the growing fingernails of Fodor Glava. Etched on his tombstone is the word Trendetir, which translates to rose. The Tommyknockers, Phoenix Gold Mine, Idaho Springs, Colorado. The Phoenix Gold Mine was excavated in 1859 during the Pikes Peak Gold Rush. the second largest gold rush in the United States. Many men were lured to the West in search of gold and a chance to get rich from the spoils of the earth. A high-stakes gamble that took many of the lives of the men who tried. There are many dangers a miner is likely to encounter. Entombment, suffocation, being buried alive. So many things could go wrong at any given time. But the Wild West called upon only men brave enough to face these dangers head-on. Within a year, most of the miners gave up or died, but those whom stayed behind told of grisly murders, cannibalism, and the Tommyknockers. Some think the Tommyknockers are ghosts or curses. Others say they are similar to the brownie or Irish leprechaun, and others think they might be aliens. Some believe the Tommyknockers are an omen of good fortune, while others believe they are a warning of approaching death. Cornish miners brought the folklore of the Tommyknocker with them when they arrived in the United States. Cornish miners sang songs about the Tommyknockers. Have you heard of the Tommyknockers in the deep dark mines of the West, which Cornish miners hear, and 'tis no laughing jest? For I'm a Cornish miner, and I'll tell you of it today, of the knock 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 of a tiny pick as we work in the rock and clay. The Cornish believed in the Tommyknockers. It was in good taste to bring extra food to share, or else the Tommyknockers would steal and hide your mining tools or cause a cave-in. Bringing a radio into the mines was considered offensive, since the noise would cover the sounds of the Tommyknockers knocking. It was customary to work in silence, listening for the knocks. 2 knocks meant luck was on your side, and that you were going to find ore. 3 knocks was considered a warning or omen of death. Tommyknockers are almost always found in the deepest, darkest parts of the mines. Some say they appear as apparitions of dead miners, trapped souls drifting through the darkness. Others say they appear like 2-foot-tall gnomes wearing miners' clothes. Many claim to hear voices coming from deep within the mines. Usually a person can hear the Tommyknockers calling out their name, entrancing them to go deeper into the darkness. In 1959, 2 men left their wives parked in a car outside Phoenix Gold Mine while they searched the mine for uranium. The 2 women were approached by a man who greeted them kindly and went on his way. After a long wait with no sign of their husbands, the women went in search of them. They found their husbands had been shot in the head right outside the mine. Years later, 2 more men were found dead inside the mine. One of those men, Ray Collins, was a known warlock and fluent in the art of black magic. To this day, some claim to see his apparition walking through the mines. Riverdale Road, Thornton, Colorado. The night seemed eternal as the twists and turns of Riverdale Road continued. On and on darkness, with interrupting blinding lights from the traffic of the city occurring less frequently as the twilight hours approached. I clenched the wheel of my car, white-knuckled in anticipation of what might happen next. The stories of Riverdale Road playing suggestions of trepidation in my mind. But I was determined to know the truth. Was Riverdale Road really the gates to hell? Was it the most haunted road in the United States? I had heard the stories, rumors, legends, all of which sent chills down my spine. Around every turn, I feared I would see the woman in white. It didn't matter if she was real or a legend. She haunted my thoughts, and that made her more terrifying. I couldn't help but think about how treacherous the road actually was. Could there have been some truth to a woman being hit and killed on the road? It seemed more than possible as I approached multiple curves and blind spots. In truth, there had been multiple accidents on Riverdale Road, some of which were fatal. My eyes were playing tricks on me as the headlights bounced through the fields and trees. I thought I saw something to my left just outside my window. It was just the reflection of the light of my stereo dashboard on the glass. I sighed, deeply disturbed by how afraid I was. My knuckles still clenched to the wheel. My anxiety was increasing as the passing cars came less frequently. I kept catching myself looking in the rearview mirror more often than necessary, the story of the phantom Camaro weaving in and out of my thoughts. Many people have claimed to see this phantom car stalking lone travelers on Riverdale Road, its one headlight blinding and approaching its prey, causing them to speed up while driving the many twists and turns. A dangerous game. I couldn't help but think this could be the cause of so many fatal accidents on this winding stretch of road. I carefully studied each road sign I passed for evidence of blood. I had stopped at an old diner before traveling the infamous road. There were so many colorful characters offering me stories of their encounters on Riverdale. As I sipped my hot coffee, I heard numerous people saying they had seen bloody handprints and blood spatter on the road signs. An older man told me that the road had been built on an ancient native burial ground, and that the spirits of the angered natives would take the form of animals and run out in front of your car. My senses were heightened. There were no signs of traffic for as far as I could see in front of me and behind me. I was alone and uneasy. The further I drove without seeing anyone, the more dread I felt. I felt as if I had traveled to a different space and time than the rest of the world, and that I'd be stuck in this darkness forever. The feelings of doom were overwhelming. I decided to turn back. The road seemed different somehow. I switched on the radio in hopes of drowning out my growing fears. The fun and poppy rhythms of a familiar 80s song did little to calm my mind. My headlights danced across a winding road warning sign. Was that blood? It was difficult to tell, but there was definitely something on it. My fear was out of control. My heart was beating faster than the rhythms playing on the radio. I began to take deep breaths in hopes of slowing my heart rate and controlling the overwhelming anxieties I was feeling. Through the darkness, I could see the silhouette of a large tree in the distance. I couldn't take my eyes off of it. There was something hanging in the tree. The closer I got, the more it looked like a human hanging from the branches. I could make out clothing and the intricate knot of a noose around the neck. I had thought I was at the brink of the amount of fear I could take, but this was fear like I had never experienced before. The body was swinging gently back and forth, hands bound behind its back. I slowed down but didn't dare to stop. I picked up my phone to call the police. My hands were shaking so bad that I could barely keep a hold of the phone, much less dial 911. I looked back up at the road in time to catch a dark silhouette of an animal running out of the field and into the path of my car. I slammed on the brakes to avoid hitting it, but the car swerved and circled, hitting something on the side of the road and coming to a stop. I'm not sure how long I had been sitting there. It seemed like an eternity of confusion and shock. The first thing I remember was hearing the song on the radio, slowly becoming more and more audible. Everything sounded like it was underwater. Through the splintered windshield, I could see smoke coming from the engine of my car. My head was ringing, and, as if a switch had been turned on, waves of sharp pains radiated around my head and left shoulder. Warm droplets of blood fell from my nose to my lips. I could taste the warm metallic thickness as it soaked into my gaping mouth. My dazed confusion quickly faded as the horrifying thoughts leading up to this moment slowly crept back into my mind. I desperately turned the keys in the ignition. My flight instincts fully kicked in. The engine sputtered but wouldn't start. My vision was still blurry, but I scrambled to find my phone. I could make out a glow coming from beneath my car seat, but I was unable to reach it. I had to exit the car. I practically fell out and onto the street as my door flew open. I grabbed my phone so quickly that, had I been a cowboy in a shootout, I surely would have won. A real Doc Holliday, driven by fear. I dialed 911, but there was no signal. The hanging tree was right beside me. My mind was at war with the idea of looking up into the tree. Part of me was desperate to keep my eyes on the body hanging above me, the thought of reanimation circumventing the deep recesses of my horrified brain. But I didn't dare look up. I couldn't. I knew I would never be able to unsee the horrors of what I would witness. I tried the phone again. No signal. I fumbled through the phone settings, desperately looking for a way to make a call. No luck. I was trying my hardest to keep from looking up, but involuntary, instinctual reflexes forced me to look above me. The ragged silhouette of the branches twisted in weird patterns of erratic shadows, but there was no hanging body. Now I wanted to look, was desperate to look. I searched the treetops but found nothing. Had my fear caused a hallucination? Was such a thing possible? I was desperate for answers. I looked at other trees on the other side of the road. Nothing but the winding, forking branches, blotting across the sky, with an occasional sighting of stars showing between the intricate branches. My mind was spiraling. Had I imagined it? Was it a ghost? My head hurt. I closed my eyes and leaned against the car in an attempt to ground myself and calm down. A few deep breaths cleared my head, my confusion and fear evolving into anger. It was stupid of me to come out here alone. Now I was stuck in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the night with no phone and my car totaled. I looked over at the front of the car to see what I had hit. The headlights illuminated through an old fence. Beyond the fence, deep in the distance, I could make out the silhouette of a large, looming house. Wolpert Mansion. Even in the darkness, I could make out the familiar architecture. I had extensively researched the history of the mansion prior to my excursion. The mansion was built in 1864 by David Wolpert. Like many others at the time, Wolpert migrated west in search of gold and silver, but settled in Thornton, Colorado with his wife Catherine Henderson. There along the Platte River, he built the mansion and began his wealthy career in agriculture. After Wolpert's death in 1909, the mansion was used as a gambling den and brothel until the new owner lost the deed to gambling during a card game. Many people came and went. Some lost everything, even their lives. The grounds became a hostile place where death and murder stained the soil red. The mansion became known as the Gates to Hell. In the early 60s, people began reporting occult activity on the land. Evidence of animal sacrifices was found all along Riverdale Road, especially at Wolpert Mansion. It is believed that the chicken coop behind the mansion was burned to the ground during a dark ritual in May 1975. 6 months later, on Friday, November 28, 1975, at 1:00 a.m., Wolpert Mansion burned to the ground, leaving behind 100 years of history. Yet, I was face to face with the ominous building. How could that be? The mansion was burned down nearly 50 years ago, and yet here it was silhouetted against the night sky. There was no doubt that this was the mansion. I had seen many photos and studied the architecture of the building. Could there have been an identical building built on Riverdale Road? Unlikely, but possible. I remembered that a new development of homes was built directly across from where Wolpert Mansion once stood. But I did not see any houses across the road, nor any signs that houses were being built. In fact, the land seemed unnaturally barren. Where was I? I was disoriented, lost. I felt terrified, but more than that, I needed answers. The house was unnaturally dark. I approached the entrance with a new and fearless drive that compelled me. I needed to know the truth. I was being drawn toward reputation. My sanity depended on it. There was no door at the entrance, just a gaping darkness waiting to devour me. As I stood upon the precipice, my eyes lost in the darkness, I was drowning in the beauty of nothing, lost within its enigmatic wisdom, and suddenly understanding everything, flashes of red and blue circling my peripheral. I had found the gates to hell. I entered beyond the doorway, somehow already knowing what I was going to see. The scene was vivid. The doorway was a portal. I was back outside, facing the remains of my mangled body. I had died in that accident. The clock on the dashboard read 1 a.m.